3 days after my wife signed a $33 million deal, she told me to leave the house we built together. No shouting, no discussion, just a door closing, like I'd already been erased. What she didn't know was that I had spent years standing quietly behind her success, choosing silence over credit. And as she stepped into the spotlight, she never saw the ground shifting beneath her feet. If you've ever been pushed aside after giving everything, you'll understand why this story still matters. It happened on a Tuesday evening, the kind that usually passes without leaving a mark. I came home later than usual, traffic thick on I-75, my phone buzzing with messages I didn't read right away. When I opened the door, I knew something was different. Not loud, not dramatic, just arranged. My wife was standing near the kitchen island, phone still in her hand, the screen glowing. Her parents were there too, seated like guests who had overstayed dinner but felt entitled to the space. A couple of people I barely knew lingered by the living room, glasses in hand, smiling too easily. The house smelled the same, looked the same, yet I felt like I'd walked into a place where I no longer belonged. She looked at me with a smile that wasn't meant for me. "We finalized it today," she said. $33 million. Can you believe that? Someone clapped. Someone laughed. I nodded once, slowly, and set my keys down. No one asked how my day had been. No one asked me to sit. She kept talking, explaining terms, dropping names, enjoying the sound of her own certainty. I had heard it all before, months ago, in quieter rooms, when she still asked for my opinion. Back then, she used to sit across from me at this same counter, pen in hand, waiting for me to tell her where the risk was hiding. That night, she didn't look in my direction once. Her mother cleared her throat. "We were just saying how much this changes things." I agreed. It did change things, just not in the way they thought. My wife finally turned toward me, her expression polite, distant, like she was speaking to someone who worked for her. "I think it would be best if you stayed somewhere else for a while." The words landed without force, no anger, no hesitation. "Just for now," she added. "You know, until things settle." I didn't ask what things. I didn't ask how long. Her father leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "It's not personal. You understand how these situations work. I had paid for most of that house. The down payment, the renovations, the quiet fixes no one notices until they stop happening. I had done it without announcing myself, without reminding anyone. At some point, silence turns into permission. I looked at her again, searching for something familiar. A crack, a sign that this was temporary. She checked her phone. "You can take whatever you need tonight." That was it. No argument to win. No door to knock on. I walked upstairs and opened the closet. My clothes were still there, neatly arranged. I pulled out a duffel bag I hadn't used in years and started filling it without much thought. Shirts, a jacket, my laptop. I skipped over things that carried weight. Photographs, old notebooks. Those stayed behind. Downstairs, voices drifted up, laughter spilling easily. They were already celebrating the version of life where I didn't exist. When I came back down, bag over my shoulder, my wife glanced at me like she'd forgotten something important, then remembered it wasn't. "I'll have my assistant reach out about logistics." "That won't be necessary," I said. She paused, surprised by the sound of my voice. "I'll handle my own arrangements." No one stopped me. No one followed. Outside, the air felt heavier than it should have. I sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine, hands resting on the steering wheel. For years, I had told myself that holding things together was the same as being respected, that keeping quiet was a form of strength. As I pulled away from the house, lights glowing warmly behind me, a thought settled in with uncomfortable clarity. Silence, when it lasts too long, doesn't protect anyone. It erases you. The car merged into the road, and I kept driving, not toward a destination, just away from a place where I had slowly stopped existing. The phone started vibrating before I reached the highway. Not her name, never hers. Numbers I recognized vaguely, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. One of her friends from church, a business contact who suddenly felt close enough to offer advice. I let the calls ring through at first, eyes fixed on the road, hands steady. When the messages came in, they all sounded the same, even though the words were different. You should be proud of her. Don't take this personally. You know how women get when things finally go their way. Be patient. Be supportive. Be a man. No one asked where I was sleeping that night. I drove until Atlanta thinned out behind me, then kept going. By the time I reached Houston, it was past midnight. The hotel I checked into sat off the freeway. Nothing special. Clean enough. The clerk didn't look up when I gave my name. That suited me fine. Inside the room, I dropped the bag near the door and sat on the edge of the bed. The silence wasn't peaceful. It felt like a room full of people who had all agreed not to look at me. I returned a few calls the next morning, mostly out of habit. She worked so hard for this, one voice said. You don't want to be the reason she loses focus, another added. Each conversation circled the same idea. Her success needed protection. My presence apparently was a liability. No one mentioned the years before, the late nights, the spreadsheets, the meetings I didn't attend so she could be there alone. That history had been edited out without my permission. By afternoon, I stopped answering. I walked down the block to a diner that stayed open late and ordered coffee I didn't need. Around me, people talked about ordinary things: work, kids, rent going up. No one cared who I was. That anonymity felt honest. My phone buzzed again, a text this time. You're being dramatic. This is just a phase. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, then slid the phone face down on the table. That night, someone I hadn't heard from in a decade asked if I wanted to grab food. Marcus. We used to work together when I was still in the business full-time, before I decided to step back and let my wife take the lead. We met at a small place near the medical center, nothing fancy. He looked older, like we all did now, but his eyes hadn't changed, still sharp, still measuring. You look tired, he said after we sat down. Long week. I heard. He didn't say how, didn't need to. We ate in silence for a while. The noise around us filled the gaps. At some point, he leaned back and studied me the way he used to before a difficult meeting. Everyone's telling you to be understanding, right? I nodded. Let me guess. They say it's not about you. I didn't answer. He took that as confirmation. They never ask what you gave up. They don't see it that way. Of course they don't. He set his fork down. So tell me something. I waited. Are you protecting your family? Or are you protecting your fear of what happens if you stop? The question didn't sting. It settled. Heavy. Accurate. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. Always had been. I thought keeping the peace was the right thing. Peace for who? I didn't have an answer ready. Marcus didn't push. He never did. He paid the bill and stood up. You've always been good at carrying weight quietly. Just don't confuse that with being invisible. Outside, we shook hands. No promises. No speeches. Back in the hotel room, I opened my laptop for the first time since leaving Atlanta. Emails waited. Old files. Drafts I hadn't touched in months. I scrolled without opening anything, noticing how much of my work still lived there, unnamed. The phone buzzed again. Another message from someone who meant well. Give her space. This will pass. I set the phone aside and closed the laptop, not because I was done, but because I wasn't ready yet. The room felt smaller than before. Or maybe I was just starting to notice how little space I'd allowed myself for a long time. I lay back on the bed without turning off the light, staring at the ceiling, listening to sounds from the hallway fade in and out, letting the day settle without trying to fix it. The laptop came back on before I realized I had decided to touch it. Email inbox first, not the recent ones. I scrolled past the last few weeks, then months, then years, until the timestamps stopped meaning much. Most of it was noise, schedules, confirmations, congratulatory notes sent to my wife, copied to me out of courtesy. I almost closed it when a subject line caught my eye. No urgency, no drama, just a name and a date from a long time ago. I opened it. The message was short, a question she had asked me late one night, unsure about a clause in an early draft of a partnership agreement. She'd attached a file and added one line at the end. Can you take a look before I send this? I downloaded the attachment. The file took a second to open. When it did, the margins looked familiar. My formatting. My comments still sat in the side panel, gray and unobtrusive, the way I liked them. Suggestions, not commands. Risks highlighted without alarm. I leaned back in the chair, letting the memory surface on its own. That document had never left my hard drive, at least not in the form they were celebrating now. Curiosity replaced the heaviness I'd been carrying since Atlanta. I opened another folder, then another. Drafts layered over drafts. Early versions of strategies people now credited her for, written in a tone that assumed no one would ever ask who had shaped them. A notification popped up in the corner of the screen. Access denied. I tried again. Same result. The company's shared drive no longer recognized my credentials. A few clicks later, the banking app confirmed what I already suspected. The joint account showed a balance of 0, with a neat note explaining the transfer had been authorized earlier that day. Everything had been done cleanly, quietly, no warning, no conversation. That level of coordination doesn't happen overnight. I closed the app without reacting and checked the time. Late afternoon, still hours before dinner. I ordered food from the front desk and sat back down, this time with intention. Files copied themselves into a new folder. Nothing flashy, just backups. Versions. Notes I'd never bothered to delete. My hands moved without hesitation, the way they used to during long nights before deadlines. Each document landed where I could find it later, labeled in a way that made sense only to me. The phone buzzed on the table. "You've been quiet. Everything okay?" I didn't respond. Another message followed. "We need to talk about your tone lately." That one almost made me smile. I muted the conversation and returned to the screen. One contract stood out. A draft from years back, sent to me for review but never discussed again. I opened it and scanned the terms. The structure matched the deal she had just signed almost line for line. The difference lay in the control clauses, the ones I'd warned her about and recommended revising. She hadn't. Or maybe she had, just not in the direction she thought. A knock at the door interrupted the thought. Food arrived in a paper bag, the smell unremarkable. I ate standing up, eyes still on the laptop, chewing without much attention. Between bites, I noticed an email notification slide into view from an address I didn't recognize. No subject, just a line in the body. "You should look closer at section 12. No name, no signature. I didn't open the attachment right away. I finished eating, washed my hands, then sat back down. The file contained a clean copy of the final contract, not leaked, shared deliberately. Section 12 sat buried beneath language designed to reassure people who didn't read closely. Control shifted after the second milestone. Voting rights reassigned. Exit penalties severe enough to discourage resistance. It wasn't illegal, it was precise. Someone had set a trap. Someone patient. The room felt smaller again, but this time the feeling sharpened instead of sinking. I saved the file to the same folder as the others, adding a note to myself about the timing. The phone buzzed once more. A voicemail notification from my wife. I didn't listen. Not yet. Instead, I logged into an old account she'd forgotten about, one tied to a consulting entity we'd set up and abandoned when she decided to move faster on her own. The password still worked. Inside sat correspondence no one had bothered to clean up. They hadn't expected me to look. I shut the laptop gently and stood, stretching my shoulders as if I'd been sitting too long, which I had. Outside the window, traffic moved the way it always did, indifferent to whatever conclusions were forming in my head. The phone lit up again, then went dark when I turned it face down. I picked up the duffel bag and pulled out a notebook I carried more out of habit than need. A pen followed. I wrote a few lines, nothing dramatic, just reminders of what I now knew and what I still needed to confirm. Dinner plates clattered somewhere down the hall. A door opened, then closed. Life continued at a pace that didn't wait for clarity. I set the notebook on the desk, slid the laptop beside it, and reached for the charger, plugging it in before the battery dipped any further. The notification came in while I was buttoning a clean shirt, a link, a headline, her name. I didn't need to open it to know what it would say, but I did anyway. There she was in New York, standing between two men I recognized immediately, smiling with the ease of someone who believes the ground under her feet is solid. The article framed her as self-made, relentless, visionary. No mention of partners, no acknowledgement of the quiet years before momentum found her. She spoke about risk like she had discovered it herself. "I trusted my instincts," she said in the clip. "Sometimes you have to cut distractions to grow." The word lingered longer than it should have. I closed the browser and finished getting dressed. Coffee tasted burnt downstairs, but I drank it anyway. The hotel lobby buzzed with people heading somewhere important. No one paid attention to me, which was fine. That invisibility had become familiar. By the time I returned to the room, an envelope waited under the door. Certified mail. Legal. I didn't open it right away. Sat on the bed instead, shoes still on, staring at the name printed neatly in the corner. Her attorney. Not someone new. Someone I'd met before, back when conversations still included me. The letter inside didn't waste words. A restructuring notice. Formal language explaining how ownership interests had been reassigned, how certain assets no longer fell under joint consideration, a timeline, a deadline. My name appeared where acknowledgement was required, not agreement. One property caught my eye, a small commercial space I'd bought years before, put in both our names because it seemed reasonable at the time. According to this, my claim had been diluted to the point of irrelevance. It was efficient, almost elegant. I folded the letter once and placed it on the desk. No shaking hands, no rush of heat, just a tightness behind the ribs that settled and stayed. The phone rang a few minutes later, a number I didn't recognize, but I answered it anyway. "You've been served," a man said. Flat tone, professional distance, just confirming receipt. I got it. Any questions can go through counsel. Understood. The call ended before I could say anything else. I sat there for a while, not thinking about revenge, not planning speeches. My mind ran inventory instead. What was gone? What remained? What I had assumed would never be challenged. Another article popped up on my screen, then another. Different outlets, same story. Her voice carried confidence sharpened by applause. Each interview trimmed away a little more of the truth, not by lying outright, but by omission. She didn't need to insult me publicly. Erasure worked better. I scrolled through comments until I didn't. Strangers debated her courage, her vision. A few mentioned me only as an obstacle she had outgrown. Someone texted, "Saw your wife on Bloomberg. Huge moment for her." I typed a reply, then erased it, set the phone down instead. By afternoon, the weight of the letter began to shift into something else. Not panic, calculation. I opened the notebook again and added a new page, listing what the legal notice actually did and didn't do, where it relied on assumptions, where it moved fast because speed discouraged questions. Control, I'd learned, often depended on the other person staying quiet. I thought about calling Marcus, decided against it. This wasn't a conversation yet. It was a situation. Another message came in, this one from her. "We'll need to keep communication clean for now. This isn't personal." I stared at the words, noticing how carefully they avoided anything that could be argued later. I didn't respond. Instead, I reached out to someone else. An attorney I trusted from years back, someone who had never confused courtesy with weakness. The voicemail picked up. I left my name and said I needed time on the calendar. Nothing urgent, but soon. Then I went downstairs and took a walk around the block. The movement helped. Breathing felt easier when my legs were working. A food truck parked on the corner served tacos to a line of people who laughed easily, unaware of how fragile control could be. Back in the room, the laptop waited where I'd left it. Files open, notes half written. I reread the contract from the anonymous email, then the restructuring notice again. Patterns emerged the way they always did when I slowed down enough to see them. This wasn't just about success changing someone. It was about removing witnesses. Evening settled in quietly. I ordered takeout again, ate without tasting much, cleaned up afterward. Small routines kept the edges from cutting too deep. When the phone lit up one more time, I ignored it and opened a new document instead, typing out dates and names, not conclusions. Facts first. Always facts. The charger hummed softly as the battery filled. I adjusted the desk chair, pulled the notebook closer, and kept writing while the city moved on outside, unbothered by what was shifting just beneath the surface. The message arrived while I was tying my shoes. No greeting, no explanation. Just an attachment and a single sentence. "You deserve to see this clearly." I sat back down on the edge of the bed and opened the file. It wasn't a copy of the contract itself. It was an analysis. Clean. Precise. Someone had taken the time to break the deal apart piece by piece, translating legal language into plain consequences. Control thresholds. trigger points, exit costs, everything laid out in a way that left very little room for interpretation. I'd seen clauses like these before, helped design some of them, years ago, when I was still working openly and people listened. The structure was familiar enough to feel personal. They hadn't just signed a deal, they had handed over leverage. I scrolled slowly, stopping where the notes grew denser. There it was, the section that locked decision-making power away after the second milestone. The same framework I'd warned her about once, long before New York and cameras and applause. Back then, she'd thanked me for being cautious. Now, she was celebrating the speed. A knock sounded at the door not long after. I didn't jump. I already knew who it would be. Marcus stepped inside without ceremony, jacket folded over his arm, expression unchanged since the diner. He glanced at the screen, then at the notebook on the desk. "You finally seeing the whole picture?" "I think so." He pulled a chair closer and sat, not across from me, but beside me, like we were looking at the same thing instead of opposite sides of a table. "They moved fast," he said. "That usually means they're afraid of something slowing them down. Or someone." He nodded once. "The deal's not bad, it's just not kind. It wasn't meant to be." Silence stretched between us, comfortable this time. He didn't rush to fill it, neither did I. "Here's the part you need to decide," he said eventually. "You can let this play out and survive on whatever scraps they leave behind. Or you can step back into the room you walked out of years ago." I didn't walk out. I stepped aside. Same difference to people who benefit from the space. I closed the file and looked at him. "They're already rewriting the story." "Of course they are. Stories are easier to control than facts." I thought about the interviews, the legal notice, the careful messages that framed my absence as maturity instead of removal. "If I push back now, I become the problem. You already are, just quietly." That landed harder than I expected. Marcus stood and moved toward the window, hands in his pockets. "You don't have to burn anything down. You just need to stop holding it up for them." After he left, I stayed seated for a long time, staring at the closed laptop. My phone buzzed twice on the desk. A text from her assistant. "Please confirm availability for a call next week." Then one from her directly. "We should align before this gets messy." I didn't answer either. Instead, I opened a new email and typed a short response to the anonymous sender, keeping it neutral, careful. "Received. Thank you. No questions. No tells." The next hour passed quietly. I reviewed the analysis again, then cross-checked it with my own notes. Everything lined up, too well to ignore. Another notification flashed across the screen. A social media post this time. Her again. A photo with a caption about growth and courage. Comments poured in fast, supportive, unquestioning. I didn't feel angry, just finished. The decision didn't arrive as a dramatic moment. It showed up the way truth usually does for me, plain and unavoidable. Continuing to stay out of sight wouldn't protect anyone. It would only make their version permanent. I called the attorney I'd left a message for earlier. He picked up on the second ring. "I was hoping you'd call back," he said. "I need to move some things quietly." "Then we should start now." We spoke for less than 10 minutes. No strategy yet. Just scope. Just boundaries. When the call ended, I stood and gathered the papers on the desk into a neat stack, sliding them into the duffel bag. The notebook followed, then the laptop. I checked out of the hotel without incident, returned the key, nodded at the clerk. Outside, the car waited where I'd left it, dusted with the usual layer of road. Before getting in, I looked at my phone one last time. Another message from her sat unread. I turned the screen off and set it in the console. The engine started smoothly. Traffic moved as expected. I pulled into the lane and let the car carry me forward, already sorting through what needed to happen first, second, and third. Hands steady on the wheel as the city slipped past without asking where I was headed. The days settled into a rhythm that didn't invite emotion. Morning started early. Coffee, emails, notes. Not everything at once. Pieces. I moved through documents the way I used to when deadlines mattered more than opinions, checking dates, cross-referencing language, lining up decisions with consequences. Nothing dramatic, just work. I set up a temporary office wherever I landed. A small desk, reliable internet. The rest didn't matter. Files stayed organized in layers only I understood. Old habit, useful now. Marcus checked in once, brief and practical. Anything change? Not yet. That means you're still ahead. We didn't talk again for 2 days. Calls from unknown numbers began slipping through. One rang just long enough to register before cutting off. Another left no voicemail. Emails followed. Generic questions dressed up as courtesy, asking for clarification on things I no longer officially handled. Someone was watching. I didn't react. Reaction gives direction. Silence keeps options open. Instead, I kept building a timeline. Who signed what? When access changed? How money moved? Patterns emerged when I stopped trying to interpret intent and focused on sequence. People make mistakes when they believe they've already won. At a cafe near the courthouse, I met with the attorney I trusted. No handshakes, no small talk. He skimmed the documents, nodded occasionally, then slid a few pages back toward me. "You were careful," he said. I had time. That helps. He marked 2 sections with a pen. These matter more than they realize. And this one, they're assuming you won't notice. I noticed. Good. Then don't let them know yet. Outside, traffic crawled. Lunch crowds shuffled past without interest. The normal pace of things grounded me, reminded me that most damage happens quietly, between ordinary moments. Back in the car, a notification popped up from an account I hadn't used in years. Login attempt blocked. Location unfamiliar. I changed the password and wrote the time down. That night, I reviewed email headers instead of messages. Sender paths told a different story than words ever could. A forwarded chain revealed an internal conversation meant to stay internal. My name came up once, dismissed quickly. He won't interfere. He never does. That line stayed with me longer than it should have. I slept lightly, not from fear, from alertness. The difference mattered. The following afternoon, an email arrived from her legal team, requesting a status update on my acknowledgement of the restructuring. Polite language, artificial patience. I waited 4 hours before replying. Received, reviewing, nothing more. 10 minutes later, a missed call, then another, then silence. Pressure rarely announces itself. It nudges. I moved locations again, not to hide, just to stay fluid. Hotel rooms blur together after a while. Same desks, same chairs, different zip codes. My routine didn't change. Work first, movement later. During a late dinner, a stranger slid into the booth across from me without asking. "You're hard to reach," he said. Accent unfamiliar, suit expensive. "I've been busy. We just want to make sure everyone stays aligned." Aligned with what? He smiled, thin and practiced. Progress. Progress doesn't require me. It might if things get complicated. I held his gaze, letting the silence stretch. Then someone should have thought of that sooner. He stood, adjusted his jacket, and walked out without another word. No threats, no offers, just a presence meant to be noticed. I paid the check and left a few minutes later, taking a longer route back, not to avoid anything, but to think. That conversation confirmed what the emails hadn't. They were feeling resistance, even without seeing it. Back at the room, I organized the day's notes, scanned copies into the folder, labeled everything twice. Redundancy prevents regret. A new message arrived from the anonymous sender. They're trying to rush the second milestone. That changed the math. I forwarded it to the attorney with a single line. "This affects timing." His reply came quickly. "Then we accelerate carefully." Night fell without ceremony. I ordered something simple and ate standing up, eyes still moving across numbers and names. Fatigue tried to settle in, but focus kept it at bay. Before shutting the laptop, I checked one last thing: account permissions, access logs, all unchanged. Good. The phone vibrated again. This time, her name appeared. I let it ring until it stopped. Not because I was ready to confront anything, but because listening too early would have blurred the work. There would be a moment for voices later. This wasn't it. I placed the phone face down, set an alarm for the morning, and wrote a short list for the next day. 3 items, no more. The pen paused at the bottom of the page, hovering briefly, then returned to the notebook as I added one more line, quiet and specific, before closing it and reaching for the light switch. The email arrived just after breakfast, subject line neutral, content anything but. It outlined a formal complaint alleging misuse of confidential information during my time advising the company. Nothing specific, no dates, just enough language to suggest impropriety without committing to facts. Attached was a notice informing me that certain partners had concerns and were requesting cooperation. I read it twice, then once more slower. This wasn't about truth, it was about noise. My phone rang before I finished setting the mug down. A number from Atlanta, her mother. "We need to talk," she said, skipping any greeting. "I'm working. This is more important." I didn't answer right away. She continued anyway. "People are saying things, ugly things. You know how rumors spread. Who's saying them? That's not the point. The point is you're making this harder than it needs to be." I closed my eyes for a moment. "I haven't said anything." "Exactly. Your silence looks bad." The call ended without waiting for a response. 10 minutes later, her father texted, "You need to stop this. Think about the family." "Stop what, exactly?" He didn't specify. A message from her brother followed, shorter, sharper. "You're embarrassing her." I put the phone down and opened the laptop instead. The complaint had already been forwarded to the attorney. His reply came back faster than expected. "They're posturing, but this will escalate if you don't counter the narrative." Countering narratives was never my strength. I preferred facts, still did. By midday, the accusation had reached a few industry contacts, not through official channels, through side conversations. Someone asking if everything was okay, someone else advising me to lay low until things blew over. Lay low meant disappear. I stepped outside to clear my head, walking until my legs felt the movement. A park nearby held people doing ordinary things, jogging, talking, watching kids chase each other. None of it connected to what was happening to me, and that disconnect made it harder to breathe. Another call came through, her this time. "You should have told me you were talking to lawyers. You should have told me you were preparing complaints." "Don't twist this." "I'm not." She exhaled, controlled. "This is getting out of hand. People are starting to ask questions." "About what?" "About you." "Then answer them." "I can't," she said. "Not without making things worse." "For who?" Silence stretched between us, not the kind I used to hold. This one pushed back. "You're forcing my hand," she said finally. "I didn't start this. You didn't stop it either." The call ended. No goodbye. I stood there longer than necessary, phone still in my hand, watching a man tie his dog to a bench while he bought coffee from a cart. Small decisions, clear outcomes. Back inside, the attorney called. "They filed a motion to restrict your access to anything related to the company. Temporary, they'll say. On what grounds? Allegations. That's enough for now. And socially? They're seeding doubt. That part's working." I rubbed my forehead, not from stress, but from the sheer efficiency of it all. What happens if I keep quiet? You lose control of the timeline. And if I don't? Then they have to respond to something real. I thanked him and hung up. By evening, messages slowed, not because the pressure eased, but because it had done its job. I could feel the edges closing in. Doors that once opened easily now required explanation. Familiar names carried hesitation. A knock at the door startled me. I hadn't ordered anything. Marcus stood there, jaw tight. They crossed a line. They think I won't push back. They're betting on your habits. He stepped inside, scanning the papers spread across the desk. This accusation? It's thin. But thin can still cut if you let it drag on. They want me cornered. They want you quiet. Same thing. He leaned against the desk, arms crossed. You don't have to swing hard. You just have to stand up. Standing up has consequences. So does disappearing. I sat down, suddenly aware of how tired my body felt, even though my mind kept moving. If I speak now, it becomes public. It already is, just not in your voice. That settled something I'd been circling for days. The choice wasn't between peace and conflict. It was between being erased slowly or stepping back into a space I'd abandoned out of courtesy. Marcus waited while I pulled up a document I hadn't touched yet. A draft statement, factual, minimal. No accusations, just a record. "Not tonight," he said, "but soon." "I know." He left without another word. Alone again, I reviewed the timeline one more time. Complaint filed, access restricted, family applying pressure, narrative forming without me. The phone buzzed once more. A group message this time. Family. short lines urging reconciliation, reminding me of history, of obligation. I didn't reply. Instead, I saved the document under a new name, closed the laptop, and reached for the notebook. The page filled quickly, not with feelings, but with steps. The clock on the nightstand blinked past 10. Outside, traffic thinned. I set the pen down, gathered the papers into order, and slid them into the bag, leaving it by the door where I could grab it in the morning. Then washed my hands and stood at the sink longer than needed, staring at nothing in particular while the water ran. The call came from a number I almost ignored. I was halfway through reviewing notes when the phone vibrated against the desk. A soft interruption I'd grown used to dismissing. Something made me pick it up anyway. "You don't know me," the woman said. Her voice stayed steady, careful. "But I know who you are." I didn't ask how. "I was part of the team that reviewed the financing structure before the deal went public," she continued. "Not the face of it, the back end." I listened. There were concerns raised about where the leverage really sat. Those concerns were redirected. Redirected was a polite word. I let her keep talking. "I left the firm 2 weeks ago. Not because of this deal alone, but it pushed things over the edge. I kept copies of what I worked on. I wasn't sure why at the time." A pause followed. "Not for drama, for courage. You should have them." An email arrived seconds later. Attachments stacked neatly, labeled in a way that told me she understood documentation as well as I did. Internal memos, comment threads, a timeline that didn't match the story being sold publicly. "Why now?" I asked. "Because they're about to lock it in," she said. "After that, it won't matter who built what, only who controls what." I thanked her. She didn't linger. The line went dead. I didn't open the files right away. Coffee had gone cold on the desk. I poured it out, rinsed the mug, started fresh. Habit. Focus comes easier when the small things are handled. When I finally clicked into the first document, the picture sharpened fast. Names I recognized appeared in margins they weren't supposed to occupy. Recommendations I'd once made showed up rewritten, stripped of caution, dressed as innovation. One note in particular stood out. A senior partner questioning why certain control mechanisms mirrored a framework I'd developed years earlier. Response followed below. "He's no longer involved. This is clean." Clean. That word again. I leaned back and let the weight of it settle. Not satisfaction, not relief. Clarity. The deal hadn't just borrowed my thinking, it had relied on my absence. I cross-checked the memos against my own drafts, lining them up side by side. The similarities weren't coincidental. They were structural, intentional. Someone had counted on me staying quiet long enough for the paper trail to look one-directional. That assumption sat at the center of everything. A message from Marcus popped up while I worked. "You sound different. What changed?" I sent one line back. Someone confirmed the source. His reply came quickly. "Then it's time to be precise." By mid-afternoon, I had a clean outline. Not an argument, a map. How the deal came together, who influenced what, when certain decisions were made, and who benefited from my supposed disappearance. I noticed something else as I went deeper, a vulnerability buried beneath the layers of confidence. The contract assumed I would never challenge authorship, that I wouldn't surface parallel documentation, that no one would corroborate my role. They'd built strength on a narrow premise. I stepped outside for air, walking until the tension in my shoulders eased. The city moved around me without interest. Someone laughed behind me. A bus hissed to a stop. Life didn't pause for revelations. Back at the desk, a message waited from her. "We need to talk before this gets any worse." I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I forwarded the files to my attorney and added a short note. "This fills the gap." His response came less than a minute later. "This changes leverage, not publicly yet, but it will." That was enough. I spent the evening organizing, not rushing. Each file renamed, each reference cross-linked. I created a separate folder for the witness, encrypted, backed up twice. Then I drafted questions, not accusations. Questions that demanded answers without revealing what I already knew. Her advantage still existed. Media, momentum, applause. None of that disappeared overnight. But advantage isn't the same as control. Around dinner, Marcus stopped by again. He read quietly, nodding as he moved through the documents. They left a door open, he said. They assumed I wouldn't see it. Or wouldn't use it. Same thing. He glanced at the phone when it lit up again. You going to call her? Not tonight. Good. He stood to leave, pausing at the door. When this turns, it's going to turn fast. I know. After he left, I packed the bag again. Laptop, notebook, a copy of the key files on a drive I kept separate. The room felt temporary in a way it hadn't before. That was fine. I checked the time and ordered something simple, eating while skimming the outline one last time. No changes needed. The phone buzzed once more, a voicemail notification. I ignored it and opened a calendar instead, blocking off the next 2 days. Before shutting everything down, I added one final note to the notebook. Not a plan, a reminder. Don't explain. Show. I closed the cover, slid it into the bag and set it by the door again, then reached for the charger and unplugged it, coiling the cord carefully before placing it on top, already thinking through where I'd need to be in the morning and who would need to hear from me first. The conference room smelled like coffee that had been reheated too many times. I arrived a few minutes early, not to make a point, just to get settled. The table stretched longer than it needed to, polished enough to reflect faces when people leaned forward. Papers were already arranged at one end. Someone had decided where authority would sit. She walked in with 2 attorneys and a confidence that filled the room before she did. No hesitation, no glance in my direction at first. Her focus stayed on the people who mattered now. Let's get this over with, she said, taking her seat. One of the lawyers nodded toward me, the polite kind of acknowledgement that carries no warmth. Thank you for coming on short notice. I sat without responding. The opening minutes moved fast, words stacked on top of each other, timelines framed to suggest inevitability. They spoke about the complaint, about risk, about why containment mattered. The language stayed abstract, careful not to accuse outright while letting implication do the work. She finally looked at me. You've put everyone in a difficult position. I didn't realize I still had that much influence. A flicker crossed her face, gone quickly. This isn't the time for sarcasm. Then let's be precise. One attorney cleared his throat. Our concern is that confidential frameworks developed during your advisory role were used without authorization. That creates exposure. Which frameworks? He hesitated, then named one. The one I'd been waiting for. And who authored it? Another pause, shorter this time. That's under review. She leaned forward, voice steady. You were consulted, not responsible. Don't confuse access with ownership. I reached into the bag at my feet and placed a thin folder on the table. No rush, no flourish. I won't. The room quieted in a way that had nothing to do with respect. I slid a document across, stopping it halfway between us. That's the original draft, time-stamped, commentary included. The version you're using now follows the same structure, same thresholds, same contingencies. One of the attorneys picked it up, eyes scanning quickly. His posture shifted. This doesn't prove. I opened the folder again and added another page. Internal memos from your financing review team, dated before the deal went public. They reference my framework directly. Her jaw tightened. Where did you get those? From someone who decided accuracy mattered. She glanced at her legal team, irritation bleeding through composure. This is a breach. So was the assumption I wouldn't notice. She straightened, pushing back from the table. You're trying to undermine everything we've built. I'm clarifying how it was built. That was when she reached for her final move. Even if this holds, she said, you're isolated. The board trusts us. The partners trust us. Public perception is settled. Perception isn't binding. Control is. I nodded once, which is why Section 12 matters. Silence followed. Heavy. Immediate. One attorney turned to the other. How does he know about that? I placed the last document on the table, the clean copy, fully executed. Because I reviewed it before it existed. Her eyes dropped to the page, then froze. The signature at the bottom wasn't hers, it was mine. The room shifted. Chairs scraped lightly. Someone inhaled sharply and didn't bother hiding it. That's not possible, she said. It is when the signing entity is a silent partner you thought you'd outgrown. Her mouth opened, then closed. Color drained from her face in stages, disbelief giving way to calculation, then something closer to fear. You were never supposed to be visible? I know. The attorneys started talking at once. Questions overlapped. Someone asked for a break. "No," I said. "We're done." She stood abruptly. "You planned this." "I planned for contingencies. You chose one." For a moment, it looked like she might say my name the way she used to. She didn't. Instead, she looked past me, already searching for exits that weren't there. I gathered the folder, returned it to the bag, and stood. No one tried to stop me. There was nothing left to argue without unraveling more than they could afford. At the door, I paused long enough to turn back. "You didn't lose this because I wanted revenge." She didn't respond. "You lost it because you assumed silence meant absence." Then I left. The hallway outside buzzed with muted voices and ringing phones. People moved quickly, eyes forward, already adjusting to the shift. I walked past them without acknowledgement, taking the elevator down alone. In the lobby, a security guard nodded as I passed. Outside, traffic pressed forward, indifferent and constant. I crossed the street, reached my car, and sat for a moment before starting the engine, letting the noise fade while my hands rested on the wheel, already moving on to the next thing that needed doing. Paperwork followed the meeting the way it always does, slow and unavoidable. Emails arrived in careful language, outlining next steps that no longer required my input. Motions were filed, statements revised. People who had once avoided my name now included it again, cautiously, as if testing whether it still carried weight. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't need to. The consequences moved on their own. Her company stalled before the second milestone. Partners requested reviews. Control clauses activated exactly as written. What had looked like momentum a week earlier turned into delay, then scrutiny. No dramatic collapse, just a steady tightening that left little room to maneuver. I watched from a distance, not because I was afraid to look, but because I no longer needed to stand in the middle of it. Messages came from her family first. Not apologies, questions, requests for context, attempts to soften what had already hardened. Her mother left a voicemail. "We didn't realize how much you were carrying." I deleted it without listening to the end. Her father sent a text asking if we could talk, just to clear the air. I didn't respond. Air doesn't need clearing when the truth is already visible. A week later, her attorney reached out. Short, formal. "There will be adjustments to the separation agreement. We'll be in touch." That was it. No explanation for what had been said behind closed doors. No attempt to negotiate forgiveness. The system had taken over, and systems don't care about emotions. I moved out of the temporary spaces and into something quieter, not permanent, just stable. A small place with enough room to think without hearing other people's expectations echo off the walls. I unpacked slowly, setting things down only where they made sense. The notebook stayed on the desk. One afternoon, Marcus stopped by unannounced, carrying 2 coffees and the same expression he always wore when things had shifted but weren't finished yet. "You okay?" "I'm steady." "That's different." "It is." We sat without talking for a while. He eventually glanced around. "You're not staying long, are you?" "No." "Good." He didn't ask where I was going. I didn't tell him. After he left, I went through the last of the files and archived them properly. Nothing destroyed, nothing hidden, just stored where it belonged. Control doesn't require erasure. It requires boundaries. The hardest part wasn't the legal fallout or the public correction. It was recognizing how long I'd confused sacrifice with virtue, how often I'd believed that enduring quietly made me honorable, when it really made me convenient. I had built systems for other people to succeed, and stepped aside when it was time to be seen, not out of humility, out of fear that asserting myself would cost me the connection I was trying to protect. That fear no longer had leverage. Her name appeared on my phone one last time late one evening. No message, just a missed call. I stared at it for a moment, then set the phone down and turned it face down on the table, letting the screen go dark on its own. I didn't feel anger or satisfaction, just distance. A few days later, I drove south without a firm plan, stopping when the road felt quiet enough. I checked into a place near the water, nothing special, and spent the morning walking without urgency. No one recognized me. No one needed anything from me. At a cafe, I overheard a couple arguing softly about money. Familiar words, familiar tension. I paid my bill and left before the conversation could settle into something heavier. Back in the room, I packed again. Less this time. Fewer things felt necessary. I left the key on the counter and drove on. The final update came through an article I didn't search for. Her resignation from the board. Temporary, they said. Strategic. The comments speculated wildly. I didn't read past the headline. What mattered had already happened. That night, I wrote a short note to myself in the notebook. Not a lesson, just an observation. Care without limits isn't kindness, it's surrender. I closed the cover and slid it into the bag, then shut the zipper carefully, checking twice out of habit. Outside, the evening moved at its own pace. People talked, cars passed. Somewhere, someone was starting a story that didn't include me, and that was fine. I turned off the lights, sat on the edge of the bed long enough to feel the day leave my shoulders, then stood and reached for the bag, lifting it easily, stepping toward the door without looking back, already thinking about the drive ahead and what it would feel like to arrive somewhere with nothing to explain.